We are students of history here on BPTV. In fact, I won a social studies award in fourth grade, and history has been laid out before our very eyes during the Braves homestand, their last of the regular season. I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley. And Grant, between Ronald Acuna Jr. delivering the first 40-70 season and Matt Olson now owning both the Braves single season home run record and RBI record, these Braves, well, they're majoring in history.
Yeah, they definitely are. And they may have some major history ahead of them in the final series, as they could become the club that hits the most home runs of any team in baseball history in a single season. It's not just one subject that the Braves have been rather good at when it comes to offensively speaking. It's been a lot of different things. I would go as far as to maybe give this Braves offense straight A's for this particular semester or this particular academic year.
Well, Acuna has 24 more steals than any previous member of the 40-40 club, creating a club onto himself. I've seen an argument, Grant, that if we go under the guise that steals are up 40% because of the rule changes, he'd be at 42 steals. But I don't think that's necessarily a fair way to look at this. Acuna can't do anything but play within the rules that he's been put in place for. And it's not like he's being challenged on this year's steals leaderboard. He has a 19 steal lead on Corbin Carroll, is one of only two players with at least 50. And in reality, there are only 5 players who have more steals than last year's league leader at 35. So steals may be up, but it's not like there's an epidemic where there's this huge number of guys running wild.
Steals may be up, for the aggregate for everybody. But if you're talking about people who like to maybe major in mental gymnastics, then you can go ahead and pull that 40% number out and try to apply it in a number of different ways. But it just doesn't work out. In the end, it ends up being Scott Steiner math. And that's not what we're here to do. And you're certainly not going to discredit what Ronald Acuna Jr. has done, because as we've said time and time again, and as I believe you just touched on, if it were so easy to do this, more guys would be doing it. Because if you look at the StatCast leaderboard, sprint speed, you'll find plenty of guys that are in and above the category of Ronald Acuna Jr. You have everybody dealing with the same number of disengagements by the pitcher, and the bases are the same sizes for every single base runner. So Ronald hasn't been given any kind of advantage over anyone else. He has just chosen to be aggressive and to run those risks and take those chances. Now, are we going to see this maybe start to evolve for other clubs moving forward? I think we are, because there was a time in which, and I know that you and I have talked about this over the last decade or so, it's kind of sad to see the stolen base so de-emphasized as it was. It's nice to see it coming back. Do I expect this to lead to Ricky Henderson's single-season record being broken, or even his all-time record being broken? No, I'm not even sure that Ricky Henderson, if you brought him back today, would be stealing 130 bases in a season. It was just a completely different time, and teams aren't letting guys run 175 times. So I guess to make a long story very short, if you're spending your time trying to discredit what Ronald Acuna Jr. has done, then you need to find something better to spend your time on.
Yeah, and I think it's to the point where it's like, can't we just appreciate history? Because we did last year when Aaron Judge set the AL home run record. But for whatever reason, this version of history, it's being picked apart, both in its very existence, as I mentioned there, with the knocking of the home run totals, and then obviously the celebration, the Cubs broadcast taking umbrage to the game being stopped on Wednesday when Acuna got his 70th steal. Remember, last year, Judge took 28 of the 31st place votes in winning MVP. Vegas tells us that Acuna is the clear leader for the NL MVP. The historical nature of the season says that Acuna is the favorite, but I just don't get this. I don't know, spinning of the narrative from multiple writers to say that it should potentially be somebody else.
Again, people have too much spare time on their hands. They're looking for engagement. They're looking for clicks. And it's that old saying on social media, don't feed the trolls. But every once in a while, you want to lure one of those trolls out so that you can give it a good whack-a-mole treatment. So whatever the case is, I think that as you look at it and as we go forward in history and look back on the season that Ronald Acuna Jr. has had, it's so far beyond 40-70 as well that I don't really know how anybody could be watching this guy and thinking about the negative or thinking about the season in a negative or a less than kind of light, because it's not just the 40 homers. It's a chance for 220 hits, 150 runs scored. Most years Ronald Acuna Jr. has a chance to win a batting title. If you go back and look at what it's taken to win the batting title over the last 10 or even 20 years, this is the kind of season that, historically speaking, just doesn't come along too often and may have never been assembled completely, especially once you factor in the stolen bases, by any player in baseball history. And we've gone through these lists where we've talked about every player from every generation that had an opportunity to do this, from 30-30 to 40-40 to 100 runs batted in and 60 steals and 200 hits. And, oh, by the way, in the middle of all of this, he's managed to strike out half as much as he used to. It's just an incredible season. He should win the MVP award. It should, I think, be pretty handily won. That's not to take any kind of shots at anybody else having a great season. Yep. I just think that people need to finally let themselves enjoy in the moment what exactly is going on, because there's that old statement, I think it's Andy Bernard from The Office made. Is there a way to know that you're in the good old days while you're actually in them? This is an example of that. So I urge you to go ahead and enjoy it, because we may not see a season quite like this at any time in the future, even with Ronald Acuna Jr. at 25 years of age in this league. That's how incredible this year's been.
Speaking of those players on the short list for NL MVP odds, Matt Olson is third behind Acuna and Mookie Betts. He obviously already broke the Braves single-season home run record, doing so on September 16th. He now owns the franchise's RBI mark, surpassing Eddie Matthews with a 2-run bomb on Thursday to push his season total to 136. Grant, there has been one season in which a league had both a 40-40 player as well as a player with 54 or more homers and at least 136 RBIs, which Olson now has. That was 2006. Ryan Howard, who had the home runs and RBI, he beat out Alfonso Soriano, the 40-40 player, for MVP. Now, it doesn't look like Olson's going to follow suit with Acuna the MVP favorite, but I put this to you. Grant, 4 times in franchise history have the Braves had 2 players in the top 5 in NL MVP voting. There has never been 2 in the top 3. Does Olson change that?
I think that he very well could. And it's going to be really fascinating to see the order in which the MVP lays out after, I think, Ronald Acuna Jr. and Mookie Betts, because we always seem to come to the thread, or the part of the thread, where Matt Olson and Freddie Freeman are mentioned in the same sentence. Now, you got to look at what Freddie's doing out in Los Angeles. He's got a chance for, 60 doubles. He's having an outstanding season, a year that would win the MVP most years. Maybe the best year of his career. I don't know how you want to stack it all up, because, by the way, Freddie Freeman's stolen a few bases this year as well, but we're not here to necessarily talk about him. I think what Matt Olson has done, and I've talked about this a lot over the past month especially, is maybe have the quietest and most dominant 50-homer season that just nobody's talking about, because he's leading Major League Baseball in home runs. He's leading Major League Baseball in RBI, in addition to setting those Braves records. So typically, when you grab 2 of the 3 Triple Crown categories, you're going to have a pretty good chance to either win the MVP outright or at the very least finish in the top 2. And there's no guarantee that Olson finishes in the top 2, but top 3, I think at this point, you really have to look at what he's done. And I don't know that you can necessarily say that there's this huge chasm of difference in greatness between Freddie Freeman and Matt Olson, or Matt Olson and Freddie Freeman. They're both outstanding players. But if you're looking at the slugging that really gets the attention and garners those MVP votes, I think I would give Matt Olson the edge to finish in that top 3. So it's, again, 2 players from 2 teams finishing in the top 4. I don't know how many times that's happened in Major League Baseball history. Maybe that can be some homework for the viewers out there, but this has been a truly unique season.
Yeah, and it obviously speaks to the historical nature of what Acuna is doing, that we're not talking about Olson being the front runner in terms of the Braves MVP candidates. It's just absolutely fascinating. They're both doing this on the same team in the same year. Now, the status of the Braves rotation is still on the loading screen. Last I checked, when it comes to the postseason, it will not include Charlie Morton, who, at least in the NLDS, whose sprained right index finger is going to have him out. He joins Max Fried in the IL, who's out with a lingering blister issue. If healthy, he'll be ready for the LDS. There's obviously Spencer Strider, Bryce Elder, the only 2 starters to make it through the regular season healthy, knock on wood or whatever this thing's made out of. Grant, what is the rotation going to look like for the NLDS?
I'm not as concerned about Max Fried. I know that they're going to have to continue to manage this blister issue. Maybe they're going to have to be very cognizant of where and when exactly it starts to become a problem for him, because it sounded like in each of his last 2 starts prior to landing on the IL, it was that, going out for that 6th inning of work, or late in that 5th inning, where it started to become a little bit of a problem. He is going to get the treatment. He said there's just different ointments, and he's going to keep it wrapped as he continues to throw and keep his arm ready. So I'm not as worried about Max Fried. And he did say after the first recurrence of this blister issue, and I say recurrence because it's something he's dealt with throughout his career, he said, I've dealt with small blisters over the years, and clearly he put the bigger blister issues of his prospect days behind him. But if this were the postseason, it's something I would try to push through. Well, now we're getting to the point where it's the postseason. So I'm not as concerned about Max Fried landing on the IL and foregoing his just final start of the season, if that means that he can be gassed up and ready to go for game 1 of the NLDS, and of course throughout the postseason run. Charlie Morton's a little bit murkier situation. It's a little bit more troublesome, because you just don't know exactly how it's going to react and respond, and you just don't know really exactly how it happened, is what it sounds like. So it puts the Braves, rotation into a state of flux. But they do have Spencer Strider, who they hope to have ready for game 1 or 2 in the NLDS. Max Fried status obviously is going to play big into that. And then they're going to have to maybe get creative with the 3rd starter. You've got Bryce Elder. He has had an up and down second half, to put it lightly. Would they look at doing some kind of situation where maybe they're looking at AJ Smith-Shawver and Kyle Wright in some order to cover those innings if they don't decide to go with Elder. Is there someone else, some other, way of doing this that you would feel comfortable with if you're the Braves? But I'll say this, it'll all depend on how the NLDS plays out. If you're up 2-0, maybe you can consider that kind of thing. If it's 1-1, I'm not sure you can. And of course, if you're in an elimination game scenario, I feel like you kind of got to go with the guy that you have kind of ridden with all year long. But that's getting way far down the road on what the scenarios could be. But we do know the rotation has some question marks attached to it. You hate that it has to do with health in the case of 2 of your top 3 starters. But the Braves have been down this road every year since 2020 in trying to plug holes in its rotation come the postseason, and they have managed to have some success in some of those years. Last year, it didn't work out for them. 2021, they managed to figure it out on the biggest stage under the brightest lights and win the World Series. So crazier things have happened in baseball than having everybody healthy at the right time and hoping that they're all out there and available to you, because sometimes it just doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, you remember in Zoolander when David Duchovny had, like, he was the former hand model and he had that big kind of contraption that kept his hand. That should totally do what they have Max Fried.
Maybe they do. They just haven't shown us.
That's right. Obviously, when you consider the 3 potential off days, that they could really only need 3 starters for the LDS. And that's obviously if there's no setbacks with Fried and then obviously Strider. But you mentioned, Elder's been so up and down, and he was obviously a big reason why this team had success early on. But he's had a 5.37 ERA since July 9th, and over the last 14 starts, he's only had 3 quality starts. And, Kyle Wright, he has had yet to really, I think, pun intended, look right with a 9.90 ERA in his first 3 outings. But I thought he looked a lot better against the Cubs on Thursday, allowed 1 run over 2 in the 3rd inning with 4 strikeouts. But he's also seen the Phillies, who obviously the Braves could end up facing twice, and has a 12.86 ERA against them with 3 home runs and 6 walks. Depth was such a major factor for this team throughout the regular season. 16 different pitchers made starts, 13 if you take away the openers and Jesse Chavez, Colin McHugh, and Dylan Lee. But I just don't know that there's no clear answer with Morton's sideline. Do they go Elder, Wright, bullpen game, Elder or Wright with an opener? I think that this is going to be one of the more fascinating things on a team that obviously doesn't have a lot of question marks going into the postseason.
Yeah, it's going to come down to how exactly they want to tackle that problem. And you just brought up an interesting point. There's no guarantee that you know who you're going to face in that first round. Clearly, the wild card matchups may not even be set until we get to the final day of the season. And by virtue of the Marlins having a game that was rained out or postponed in the bottom of the 9th inning against the Mets, will they have to do something with that? Who knows how it's going to play out over the next 72 plus hours? But the Braves, they were able to clinch early. They've been able to work their way into the best record overall to clinch that postseason, a home field advantage throughout, and they're going to attack the week that they have from the end of the regular season to the start of the NLDS in a different way with some daily sim games throughout the week to kind of keep themselves on schedule. I would say if you could line it up, in dealing with the things that you have to deal with, because you can't change the fact that injuries pop up at inopportune times, it seems like they're doing their best to get themselves lined up in a way that maybe they didn't have the opportunity to last year. So if you are using last year as the barometer for what to expect this year, which I would caution against because every year's not the same, it would appear that the Braves are trying to approach this problem a little bit differently this time around.
Yeah, they obviously, as you mentioned, have earned themselves a rest ahead of the LDS. And that also means that the speculation about who's going to make the postseason roster is going to have some legs this time around. So let's talk potential surprises. Certainly, this is barring any injury setbacks, but give me a surprise that we could see make that roster when it's unveiled.
I don't know that it's going to be a surprise, and I kind of maybe let the cat out of the bag a little bit earlier, and I know there's been a lot of talk about it in general, but the way AJ Smith-Shawver looked against the Chicago Cubs, that's a guy that, I'm not asking him to go out there and throw 6 scoreless innings, and I don't think the Braves would be either, but if you could get the same kind of start, 65 to 75 pitches that they got from him against the Chicago Cubs as the, either the chunk, the bulk reliever that comes in after an opener, or the guy who just starts the game and tries to get you through those first 4, you could do a lot worse. And then maybe you look into, hey, Kyle Wright could cover the next 2 to 3. And if you get into any trouble, you can start mixing and matching your bullpen because, as you mentioned, with the days off, you don't have to carry a full allotment or assortment of starting pitchers to try to figure out this series. You can go to your relievers a little bit more and not have to worry about, okay, well, I've thrown this guy 3 straight days because you're not playing 3 straight days. So I think that could work out in an advantageous way. But I would look at AJ Smith-Shawver, a guy who was touching 100 miles an hour, it's still 98 in the 4th inning, showing the velocity that we'd heard about in the minor leagues. And that I think we saw a little glimpse of at times early on when he made his major league debut. That would be somebody that I would circle and say, keep an eye on him, because on this depth chart, he has to have a place somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you on Smith-Shawver. He looked really strong over those 3 2/3 innings against the Cubs, but It's interesting with Wright because I've seen some speculation that maybe he gets left off the roster, but I think the way that he was used the last couple times out against the Nationals and the Cubs, those were his first regular season relief work since 2019. Obviously, something he memorably did with great effectiveness during the 2021 World Series run. Maybe that's a glimpse of what's to come if he's deployed the same way. And I think he would make a lot more sense than Colin McHugh, who got roughed up in Gwinnett as a long relief option. So, let's call him a mild surprise. Obviously, I think, if you're looking at that pinch running guy, Forrest Wall, who swiped 52 bags in Gwinnett, he could be a real weapon. Yeah, I think he's absolutely in as well. But I just don't think there's going to be a lot of surprises when it comes to this team, just because they're, the way that they're utilizing guys. I think certainly the pitching element's going to be maybe the only thing that you look at and maybe raise some eyebrows, but I don't think surprise is going to be the opportune word when we see the makeup of this postseason roster. The Braves host the Nationals with the top seed in the NL wrapped up, along with home field advantage throughout the postseason. History for Acuna and Olson is in hand. Spencer Strider needs a mere 3 strikeouts to supplant John Smoltz for the modern-day Braves record. The team, as you mentioned, is 4 homers from overtaking the 2019 Twins for the single-season mark of 307. They need 3 wins to tie the 1998 club for the franchise wins record. What's the focus on for you, Grant, for the final series of the regular season?
Well, it's wonderful to be able to lay all of those things out, but I'm going to say the thing that I've been saying since the day that they clinched the division: stay healthy, get through the remainder of the 3 games this weekend, and have everybody lined up and ready to go for the division series. That, to me, is the number one focus. If you're asking for something statistical, well, nobody's been talking about this, but the Braves have a chance to have a 20-game winner in their starting rotation for the first time since 2022, as Spencer Strider also has a chance for his 20th win. You get 20 wins, which could lead the majors, and you lead the majors in strikeouts. Well, I know we're not going to get into it on this episode. We've talked about it before, but a few Cy Young votes will be coming Spencer Strider's way, even if he doesn't win it. But I think it's been something to watch throughout the course of the year. The thing that he's been doing with strikeouts to grab that record from John Smoltz, that would be a pretty special thing to do in your first full season in the major leagues as a starting pitcher. And Spencer Strider has done some special things, and perhaps the most special are ahead of him in the next month to come.
Yeah, certainly there's the opportunity to rest some arms and some guys to get, make their case for the postseason roster. But to me, it's 2 things: the homers against a pitching staff that has allowed more than any other team, and seeing Strider take his place with the most strikeoutiest season since the team decided to call Georgia home. Now, I think if you're going to go this far, pull the Cody Rhodes into the conversation and let's finish the story. Finish the story when it comes to the Strider Ks. Finish it when it comes to the homers. Finish the story when it comes to the single season wins mark, at least tying it anyway, but it's still there. The stage is set for October, but get there in some serious style. The postseason, it's nearly here, and make sure you go along for the ride with us here on BPTV. So be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell a friend about what we've got going on here. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves Country.